When you enter Nova Scotia, there's 3 land entrances. Almost the entire pandemic, only one entrance had, we call them our border guards. And so the other 2 entrances are wide open. The government knew that, but it was a lot of it, the local people felt the border people were there for optics, so that the people in the rest of the province felt protected, even though for almost the entire pandemic, no one was denied entry into this province of Nova Scotia. A lot of people didn't realize that. So there were conservation officers at the border, and they were incredible, very professional, but they were essentially Walmart greeters. They welcomed people in. If somebody was from not a local person, they said, make sure you self-isolate. No data was collected and no follow-up was done. Now, that went on almost the entire pandemic. I would have RCMP officers calling me saying, Elizabeth, there's people entering Nova Scotia with full-on COVID symptoms. There's people during when Ontario and Quebec were having outbreaks, we'd get 60, 70 cars a day from Ontario or Quebec. And our border people had no ability, no power to stop them. So that was going on. And then when you come in on Trans-Canada Highway, exit 1, you take that and it goes down LaPlante Street into our downtown Amherst. That exit to this day is still closed. Yep. So our entire business community has been, we know every business has been impacted by COVID, but our businesses are impacted exponentially, because even when there's no restrictions, we still couldn't have people enter through exit 1 into our town. And it's still closed to this day. So, and then I guess the last point I'll make kind of as a lead up to what happened is similar to Halifax, Dartmouth, if you go back to that analogy, between 40 and 60% of the customer base for our businesses here in the border community are from Southern New Brunswick. So the entire time that the borders have been closed, our businesses here lost more than 50% of their customer base. So when the rest of the province was open, and we were technically open, our businesses still couldn't access 50% of their customer base. And a lot of people were very, very frustrated by that. And so now let's go to what happened on June 22nd. Okay, so I guess one other point I'll make is I became very good friends with Megan Mitten. She's the Green Party MLA from Sackville, Westmoreland, New Brunswick. Amazing woman. We talked 2-3 times every week for 15 months. We had asked Premier Higgs and our Premier to form a bubble similar to what Northern New Brunswick did with Quebec. There's 2 communities in Northern New Brunswick. They twinned, they called it. We had been asking since last November for our premiers to do that here between Cumberland and Westmoreland, knowing how integrated we are. And on June 11th, Premier Higgs made an announcement that he was going to welcome Cumberland County to be part of New Brunswick's reopening plan. So everyone was elated. It was like keeping in mind, all of the challenges that I've just shared with you. So I called up Premier Rankin on June 11th and said, oh my goodness, we're so happy here. Premier Higgs is allowing Cumberland County into New Brunswick. And Premier Rankin said no. That was on June the 11th. And so the people here were very angry on June 11th. And then on June the 15th, Premier Rankin came out and said, well, we're going to open to the rest of Atlantic Canada on June the 23rd. So then everyone's like, okay. So now June 23rd. Then on June 22nd at 2:00, a press release was sent out saying, oh, I've changed my mind again. We're going to open up to PEI in Newfoundland, but now we've changed our mind with New Brunswick. And they also shared these, I don't know if you saw them, but just bureaucratic red tape, like mishmash of rules of 1 vaccine and 2 vaccine and testing and isolating for 3 days and 7 days. And like, it was just total confusion and total. anger. So June 22nd at 2 o'clock, when that was released, I got a flood of messages through all those my portals from people basically saying, we're done. We're done. And so I thought long and hard, because there had been a group that had been actually at the Nova Scotia New Brunswick border for the previous 8 weeks every Sunday. And they had shut the border down a few times. It didn't make the media, but there was a group that had been meeting every Sunday for 8 weeks. I hadn't ever gone out and joined them. I knew of them, but I didn't really support blocking the Nova Scotia Brunswick border, because I've been trying to get it open.
Right.
Right. So, but that group, as well as many others, contacted me as soon as on June 22nd and said, we're shutting things down. We've had it. So I thought long and hard. Well, not too long, probably 20, 30 minutes. And I decided that I was going to go and join them. And I know I've been in Halifax when streets have been shut down and the port have been shut down and trucks not been able to go due to different protests, whether it be against forestry or climate change. And so I knew that in the past, other MLAs have gone and stood shoulder to shoulder with their constituents in support of what they were protesting. So I made a decision to do that day, and met probably about 200 people at exit 7, which is in a place called Westchester. It's about 35 minutes from the Nova Scotia New Brunswick border. And I arrived there at about 4:30 on June the 22nd. And I stayed there with our people until probably about 9:30. And there was RCMP on site. They assured me that it was a legal, peaceful protest, that emergency vehicles and actually all vehicles were able to be diverted through other exits. And any vehicles that were in the lineup that had, or at least ones that we were aware of, that had children or anybody that had any sort of medical condition, the RCMP asked the protesters if they could get through, and the protesters did allow them through. So I looked at it as, I'm there to support the people. I know what they've been through. And one of my, I guess you call him a friend, but also somebody who has a lot of political experience, he came and talked to me. He said, Elizabeth, Premier Rankin. So I did try calling Premier Rankin about 5 or 6 times. He never took the calls. And my friend just said, look, he's clearly not going to do anything. And said, why don't you ask the people to go home? And if in exchange, you will travel to the city early in the morning, requesting a meeting with the Premier to share their concerns. So I took his advice, spoke to the people. The media were all there. They recorded all of it, but they didn't show any of that, right? So I gave a little speech, asked people to disperse, to go home for safety, and for their safety, for everyone's safety, and told them on their behalf, I would go and request a meeting with the Premier. And everything was shut down. I went home and got up in the morning, went down and tried to see the Premier, but he did refuse. Unfortunately, I stayed there all day and I met several great people. But so that's what happened on Tuesday. Meanwhile, through the night, the group that had been meeting at the border for the last 8 weeks, they went and set up a blockade. And when I found out about it the next morning, RCMP and I had been talking back and forth. I did speak with them over the phone and asked them to please open up the highway. That happened 3 times throughout the day on Wednesday, but keep in mind, they were not representing me. They were there on their own accord and were not, they were making their statement. I think they were mad too that Premier Rankin was not willing to listen and not willing to hear their concerns.